You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible. A recent article for 538, my next guest contends that college football doesn't give black coaches many chances. For example, black coaches still make up a small share of Division I college football coaches based on this graphic that measures growth since 1975. Look at this graphic here, folks. If that was Wall Street, some folks would be throwing up. And the Power 5 coaches are still overwhelmingly white. Josh, so the writer is Josh Planos. He's going to be joining us in just a moment. But this is the thing that was very interesting because, Greg, I'll go to you. It was interesting when you talk about these coaches, and somebody watching, they may say, look, why is this really a big deal? Because here's the thing, and again, I'm going to go back to Howard Bryant. He also has done this example as well. He's laid out how many black coaches in the NBA have gotten head coaching jobs but never played. And it is stunning. You find very few African Americans who have become NBA head coaches who never played. But then he compared it to the number of black former players who became head coaches. And what it essentially says is that if you're a black, and in Major League Baseball, the same thing.
No question.
He lays this out, that the gateway to becoming a coach in these sports, if you're black, is you had to have played the sport.
Absolutely.
But if you're white, you didn't have to.
No.
And so what we're seeing when it comes to these colleges, same thing. These presidents and athletic directors hiring coaches, quote, who they're familiar with, the relationships. We see the exact same thing happening in the NFL. Same thing, front offices. Who do I know, familiar with? How does an Adam Gase suck in the Miami Dolphins and then gets fired in Miami, but then gets a new head coaching job in New York where he is sucking at the New York Jets? You will not see a black head coach who absolutely sucks in one team and then in the next year get fired and get immediately hired by another team. And so, Josh Planos, you did a great breakdown. He joins us right now on the phone. A great breakdown of what's happening in these colleges. And when people say it's not a big deal, not until you start looking at Harbaugh and Saban and Dabo Sweeney and these coaches who are now making $5, $6, $7, $8, $9 million a year. Josh, you there?
Yep. Thank you so much for having me.
All right.
You're absolutely right. I think sports is a reflection of our society. And unfortunately, for as long as there's been college athletics, there have been a huge disparity between, those who have positions of power and those who don't. And as I tried to lay out in the article, it's pretty easy to find that along racial lines.
And of course, at 538, you break these things by numbers, and no one can dispute this reality. And you hear all of these excuses by these administrators, but this is really not about performance on the field. It's really not about recruiting. What college athletics and what football is all about is how do you please white donors?
Agreed. I mean, really, the whole structure is white. I mentioned in the piece that we haven't, I guess it'll take effect in early January. We've literally never had a non-white Power 5 commissioner. These are the conferences that cash the biggest checks. So all of these people are non-black. The athletic directors are largely non-black. The coaches themselves are largely non-black. The only time you find a black majority seems to be when you trickle down to the players who are actually giving up their bodies to produce the product on the field that is actually raking in millions and millions of dollars. The NCAA is $1 billion industry. But unfortunately, it seems like it's a lot of the same people making the calls.
I'll give an example that really jumps out at me. And I'm going to use a media example, and then I'm going to use a coaching example. Jeff Zucker becomes the executive producer of the Today Show at 25. Mark Shapiro becomes this major executive at ESPN in his 20s. I can name any number of white media executives who were 30 and 31 who became EVPs and top executives and took over. I look at Lane Kiffin, who was just hired at Ole Miss as the head coach, who is 44 years old and already has his fifth major coaching position. Fifth. A guy who became the head coach of the Oakland Raiders in his early 30s, gets fired, becomes the head coach at Tennessee, then leaves Tennessee to go to USC.
Yes.
And then after gets fired at USC, goes on the staff of Alabama under Nick Saban, gets hired at Florida Atlantic University, now just got hired by Ole Miss. I look at Kendall Briles, the son of Art Briles, who is 37 years old. And folks just talked about how he is just this amazing offensive mind. I look at the guy who just got hired as the head coach, Mike Norvell at Florida State, where they fired Willie Taggart. I think about the son, I believe it's the guy who used to be with the Patriots, used to be head coach at Notre Dame. I'm going to get his name in a second, his son as well. Here's why I'm saying. I can't show you a single example of a black whiz kid. And I'm just saying, even like, so I use media as well, because the point is, we don't get to be able to show our wizardry at 23 and 24 and 25. We got to go to these really small places, and that just speaks to this system that elevates young white talent quickly and doesn't do it for black folks.
Absolutely. And when the industry is not operating like a turnstile, which it so often is, because for an athletic director, it's a lot easier to sell to your fan base that, here's, X coach who's coming in with, decades of experience than it is to say, we're going to take a shot with this guy who maybe is unproven. Because of that, in the off chance that you do take a chance, you're largely pulling from offensive and defensive coordinators, which black candidates are seldom elevated to. I mentioned in the piece, since 1975, I can only find 7 instances of an African-American head coach being fired and then receiving a second opportunity as a head coach. So even once you get the position, just having that anvil hanging over your head, knowing that if this product does not turn out to be successful, there goes my chance. Must be crippling, frankly, to sit in the coach's booth under those circumstances.
Well, and that's exactly it. And what I was thinking, of, he was the son of Charlie Wise,
Right. Yeah.
who got hired at Florida Atlantic. And again, this thing is crazy, Josh. Charlie Wise Jr. was 24 years old and became the offensive coordinator at Florida Atlantic University. What, because Charlie Wise is your dad? I mean, but again, though, I can't think of any black black coach at 24 or 27 or 28 or 30 who becomes an offensive coordinator at a major program.
Even in the NFL, that's true. I mean, you saw Sean McVay. Obviously he was super successful in getting the Rams to the Super Bowl last year. But name anybody else but a white guy who's going to get that opportunity at such a young age.
Right.
Which I mentioned in the piece is what was so surprising about Willie Taggart, and unfortunately, he didn't even get 2 years to prove his value to Florida State. But what's so exceptional about Willie Taggart is at 43, he had already landed some of the most coveted positions in all of the NCAA, right? I mean, he had been elevated to head coach at Oregon and Florida State. These are high-profile jobs, and unfortunately, even with his experience, that's such an outlier if you look at historically, hiring practices along racial lines.
Well, same with Kevin Sumlin. I mean, head coach at University, offensive coordinator at Oklahoma, head coach at University of Houston, head coach at Texas A&M, now in Arizona. And so to be a head coach at 3 is stunning. And then you have people in Arizona who were yelling for him to get fired this year. And I'm like, y'all sucked before he got there. But again, that's the reality of when you but you don't hear the people yelling, fire Chip Kelly at UCLA. And so then not only that, you got Scott Frost, who they still suck at Nebraska. And guess what? I think he got an extension.
Right.
Wow. It's amazing how
he did. That's actually,
yeah. Go ahead.
That's right in my backyard. I can tell you that folks in Lincoln are none too pleased, and yet it was enough to convince the athletic director, senior officials within the program to give this guy a 2-year extension. It wasn't even as though next year was his final season. They just added on additional seasons, even though Nebraska is, I don't know by any metric you could call them an even average program at this point.
Absolutely.
And this guy was the prodigal son, so he's going to get a longer runway. And unfortunately, that's the current climate we live in.
Josh Planos with 538. We appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for having me.
Julian, I want to go to you. You've served as a college president. The reality is, at these major programs, I would dare say at an HBCU, the comparison to the major football program probably would be how well does a band perform. And so the level of pressure that's applied by big funded boosters. At these major football programs, these are largely white boosters. They're the ones who are dropping the millions of dollars. They're the ones who want their asses kissed and their rings kissed. And that's really, when you look at some of these people, it's not even really how you do on the field. In fact, the Arkansas, even though Chad Morris, he's white, he got fired at Arkansas because essentially they said, well, he was sort of boring off the field because it's about slapping those backs of those alumni. And guess what? They don't look like this panel.
You know, that, Roland, the whole issue of the economics of sport, especially in these Big Five and other universities, is really kind of reprehensible. Harry Edwards used to talk about black sports professionals as gladiators, likening them to in the Roman days, the gladiators who went out and fought but did not get any return on what they were doing. And this is what we're seeing now. But beyond that, the structure, as the young man said about it's the same structure we see in corporate America. How in any rational mind would Ivanka Trump and Josh be in the White House being senior advisor? They don't know, what we say, shit from Shinola.
Right.
But they're senior advisors to the president. And when you look at some of those appointees, this is all about personal relationships. It's not about qualifications. So these black coaches don't get second chances because basically they took a chance on them the first time. They don't get a second bite at the apple. Right. And the unfairness is just built into our system. And, with the sports thing, it's even worse because these young men and women, the young brothers, young sisters who are playing, they're not capitalizing on their numbers or anything else. This is why people are talking about paying these right. athletes, because they're not being able to capitalize on anything. But, when you see black folks on the field and white folks as coaches, there's something wrong.
Right. And I think Julianne's point is so correct, because in every facet of America, what we see is people who claim they're not racist, they're not sexist, but they can only deal with black people or deal with women when they're in subordinate positions.
Yes.
Right? The only dynamic that they're comfortable with is a superior subordinate relationship. And the minute that black person or that woman or that young person asserts themselves and says, hey, no, look at what I can do, then they're not viewed as being dynamic and the whippersnapper, the new hot thing. They're viewed as the threat. And I think to some extent we see this even translating into our politics, where people are asking why is Pete Buttigieg doing so badly in the black community, right? And I think part of it is how many black people know that they know a brilliant, dynamic, intelligent, capable black person who would never ever be considered remotely viable for president of the United States at 34. I mean, people didn't think that Andrew Gillum should be the governor of Florida at that age, right? You know, so I think that, you know, we can say, yeah, Pete has a great resume. He appeals to a certain number of people, but I think everybody understands when he steps up and says, I think I can be president of the United States, he's making a statement about this country too, which is that only he could step up at 34 and say, hey, I should be president of the United States. And I think that that is reflected, as we say, in college and everywhere else. If somebody steps out, when I, as a black woman, stepped up and said, I think I should be a United States senator, what I was told is, that's not your lane.
Right.
That's not your lane. It's not for you.
Greg, what we're dealing with here, Greg, this is the only way this changes. It's the only way it changes. The only way this changes is when the black labor force rises up.
Agreed.
That's it. So at the end of the day, until you have the parents of 4- and 5-star players publicly say, where are your black offensive coordinators? Where are your black defensive coordinators? Don't just sit, because see, y'all, look, I'm wearing my Texas A&M. I work for the athletic department at Texas A&M. I'm telling you, at nearly every major program in America, do you know who the hottest recruiters are? It's typically a black coach who's either a running backs coach or a wide receivers coach.
That's right. That's right. Well, Roland, it's interesting you say that, brother. This is a plantation model. Sports, as you say, no different than corporate America, no question in politics. It's all a corporate. And when I say a plantation model, I mean we have to study the plantation as a complex. It's very important to understand that black labor is being exploited, but also black intellect. My brother-in-law, Randy Fuller, who played for several teams in the NFL over about 7 or 8 years, including the pre-Tomlin Pittsburgh Steelers. He went to Tennessee State, my alma mater, where you just spoke. It's HBCU. In that transition from desegregation to segregation to desegregation, these white professional coaches would spend the summers with men like Joe Gillum Sr., who was his mentor at Tennessee State, or Archie Cooley at Mississippi Valley, who coached Jerry Rice. And
Eddie Robinson.
Yes, Eddie Robinson and Grambling. They would pick their brains. And then they would take that intellectual capital back to the league, but they would never hire these brothers.
Right.
Oh.
So now what you see, what you've described at A&M and all these plantation schools, I don't watch professional football known as college football for this very reason. You see those brothers on the sidelines because without those brothers, they don't get those blue chip recruits. But you see Nick Saban stealing money from one of the poorest states in the country by the millions because they can count in a plantation economy on not just exploiting labor, but exploiting intellect. Finally, I'll say this. When we look at the women, you look at a Dawn Staley, for example, an all-world everything coming out of Dobbins High in North Philly, who coached at Temple, who then coached at Virginia, who's now at South Carolina. You see in the women's basketball arena, perhaps a willingness to have more black women coaching. But as you said, if you're going to coach, that means you had to play.
Right.
So the last thing I will say is that I think this changes when we go back to our black institutions. Because I know as an academic at Howard, we cannot compete with Georgetown. We cannot compete with Maryland. And I'm talking about as academics because that athletic budget allows those schools to then subsidize research for academics. So we all know people, and I know you know, Dr., who would have loved to have been at Bennett with you. But UNC gives them a travel grant, and they go around the world. And that's because those black bodies are playing basketball down there on Tobacco Road, and it translates into them then siphoning all of our intellectual capital. I think we have to turn from these plantation schools and go to our schools. And once we go to our schools, we can then begin to renegotiate this whole thing. And that's what scared the hell out of NC2A about that Rich Paul situation. Because, see, LeBron and boys is like, we're going to control our labor now on the agent side. And it shook them so bad that they backed up off trying to break Rich Paul because they realized if they ever take that, if you ever start sending these...
trying to require agents to have a college degree.
See, that's what I'm saying. And see, and in fact, I didn't want...
You know, it was all because of Rich Paul.
Brother, I know you speak to a lot of HBCU graduations. When you talk to young people, this is what I tell young people in particular. I'm not talking about college students. I'm talking about elementary school age students and middle school age. I said, all y'all want to go play basketball, all y'all want to go play football, listen, somebody in here need to be the agent. And if you're the agent, when your boy gets ready to sign a deal, your girl gets ready to sign a deal, you get 5%. This man, Scott Boras, this week alone, this man has made almost $50 million just off of 3 signings. Yes. I'm telling these young cats, sis, That's your boyfriend? No problem. Let him go to the league. You go to law school. Let's break this thing wide open.
Well, in fact, there's a sister who I follow. She's a black female sports agent. And after Boris negotiated the Garrett Cole deal with the Yankees, she said, because she does NFL, she said, I'm about to sign some baseball players because that's the piece.
Oh, let me say this right quick. Howard Bryant, since we can maybe this one. When Howard Bryant said about a month ago that Major League Baseball is the greatest exploiter of immigrant labor, all this black labor from the Caribbean, a third of Major League Baseball is black. But none of the front offices are black. The coaches are a little bit black. But Howard is making the point, and his sister is making the point. Major League Baseball, let these Latino brothers from the DR and Puerto Rico and Venezuela and all these places, y'all go get y'all some black agents and stop talking about this black and Latino business as if we different people.
Well, that's why I always say, if you want to be in the NBA, you can be in the NBA, but you ain't got to bounce the ball.
No question.
You could be, and that's the piece.
That's the GM at the Raptors.
Which is why, and one of the things that we do, which is why I interview these folks, is because we want to show who these folks are, so somebody can say, "Oh, I didn't realize they even existed." You want to check out Roland Martin Unfiltered? YouTube.com/Roland S. Martin. And subscribe to our YouTube channel. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. See that name right there? Roland Martin Unfiltered. Like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Roland S. Martin. And don't forget to turn on your notifications so when we go live, you'll know it.